This conference will now be recorded.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome again to our disinfection and decontamination series. As you all know by now, our consultant here is Dr. Philippe Stroot, who's with Xibios Biosafety Consulting. He's done other sessions with us as well, and Philippe is an expert in his field. Today, helping Philippe co-facilitate and give summaries in Urdu will be Dr. Saida Samra Jafri. Dr. Saida Samra Jafri is a science professional trained through PEPSA, and she's also an assistant professor. And with that, I would like to get started. Start करने से पहले 2 rules please. अपने आप को mute पे रखें and अपना webcam ना on करें. हमारे ये sessions record हो रहे होते हैं और फिर वो disturbance हो जाती है अगर आप लोग इस तरह करें. And with that, I will hand over the platform to Philippe.
Thank you, Marshall. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So now it's time for the second session of the series of webinar on decontamination in a COVID-19 context. And this session will be dedicated to disinfectant and chemical decontamination. So there will be 2 parts. The first one will be different elements that we need to take into account when choosing the most appropriate disinfectant. And part 2 will be an overview of the characteristics of the most available disinfectant in Pakistan, and then we'll conclude on more kind of strategic view on how to use disinfectant in this context of COVID. So chemical decontamination, I will start again with some definition that will remind you more or less of the ones we gave during the first session. The first product we want to define is disinfectant. That's a product that inactivates or kills the virus and vegetative forms of microbes. That means everything except spores. So that's a category of product. And then there are also other names that we use, like bactericide, virucide, fungicide, sporicide. And those products are able to inactivate, respectively, bacteria, virus, fungi, and spores. So that's quite easy. And then we also have sanitizers, and sanitizers are products that reduce the number of vegetative bacteria, but without really giving a number. So it's generally much less powerful than a disinfectant. And then we have antiseptics, which are products that prevent or stop the growth of action of microbes. So they don't necessarily kill microbes, but they prevent microbes from doing harm. So they are mainly used on living tissues, such as worms, for instance. We could not use a too strong product because in that case, we would also hurt the tissues. So the main types of disinfectant, there are different categories. The first one is alcohol. We know them quite well, I think. And the alcohols used for disinfection are mostly ethanol, but also isopropanol. Then we have different categories of oxidizers. The first ones are the chlorine releasers, like sodium hypochlorite or bleach, which is very much used in many labs. And then we have some other halogens like iodine and peroxygens like hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. Another category is the aldehyde, and we know formaldehyde, which was previously very much used, but there are also some less powerful products, different types of glutaraldehydes. Then we have phenolic compounds. The main one is phenol. We have biguanides. The most known is chlorhexidine, and then we have some quaternary ammonium compounds or cracks like benzalkonium chloride. So if we look for the ideal disinfectant, we need to look for a number of features that they have. First, and probably the most important thing, is that we need to have a disinfectant which is efficacious. I mean, we need to have a real efficacy of the inactivation that should be demonstrated. Then it should be short acting so that we can work with a short contact time. It should have a wide spectrum, meaning that it should be active against all types of biological agents. It should also be multi-purpose, meaning that it should be it should be used in different types of application, if possible, all applications. So, for instance, for solids, for liquid, for equipment, for etc., and so on. It should be stable, meaning that it should have a long shelf life, that time should not have an effect on it, but also that efficacy should not be affected by the conditions of use, like, for instance, the contents of organic contents or organic matters. It should be easy to use. It should be non-toxic, non-irritating, not damaging to surfaces, also non-flammable, odorless, leaving no residues, and so on. It should be friendly to the environment, and finally, it should be cheap. So if we look for such a product, we'll realize that actually such a product, we cannot find it. It doesn't exist. So we need to keep in mind that all the disinfectants, they have their pros, but also their cons. They have some interests, some advantages, but they also always have drawbacks. And some of the drawbacks is that those products are made to kill microorganisms, and so they might have some effect on our own health, for instance. So the most important factors is first efficacy, and efficacy should be using a relatively short contact time. And so this is really the main thing we should look for the disinfectant. Depending on our activities, on the type of organism that we use, it should be efficacious against those. The other important feature is, especially in labs or in an organization where multiple agents and activities are conducted, like also in hospitals where you could have many different agents, is the wide spectrum of activity. So the disinfectant should be able to work and to be able to inactivate many different biological agents. Also, using a wide spectrum disinfectant also facilitates correct application, because we have just one recipe to use, for instance, and it limits the risk of mistakes and also facilitate logistics. A third very important factor is it should be adapted to the specific use, and there are some use which are like disinfection of surfaces that we always do, I would say, but we should also be able to decontaminate liquids, to decontaminate some tools by immersion and so on, and so the disinfectant should be adapted to those uses. Oops. No, sorry. So those disinfectants have different ways, different modes of action, and I took the four main ones: damage to the cell wall, when there is a cell wall, alteration of the cell membrane, and those thanks to those two, the cell is already partly destroyed, and it also allows the disinfectant to get in and to destroy more things, like the proteins and, like, for instance, the nucleic acids. If we look at those modes of action, there is always a deterioration of the cell membrane, because that really helps the disinfectant penetrate the cells and then to be more aggressive, to do more damage to the cell. And most disinfectants, and at least all the quite wide spectrum and efficacious disinfectant, have several modes of action. There are because of that, they are efficacious against different types of biological agents. The effect is very strong because a number of different functions are really altered into the cell. And also there is no risk of resistance of the cells that are attacked. And so with respect to disinfectant, there is no product rotation made. We don't need to alternate one disinfectant to the other and so on, like we do, for instance, for antibiotics. Also, some disinfectants act at much more levels than others, and they are much more complete in their action. And those are the most likely to be efficacious against different types of organisms, and thus to be considered wide spectrum disinfectants. In this table, I took the different categories of disinfectants versus the different types of microorganisms. And we won't go into detail to this table, which can be found on different books on our internet site, but I will insist on just 2 points. The first one is that if we look at those three products, like chlorine releasers, bleach, H2O2, and formalin, they are active against all types of microorganisms. So they are clearly wide spectrum. not always the same level of activity, but they are active against all type of microorganisms. So that's interesting, of course. The second point I want to stress on is that coronavirus actually, all the products are active, have some activity against SARS coronavirus. So when we look at the spectrum of activity and efficacy, we need to look at the different categories of different types of microorganisms or biological agent, but sometimes we need to go into detail, even if we know that this kind of microorganism of like lipidic viruses, for instance, are more sensitive. We need to be sure about that, and sometimes we need to look more at details and also at the tests that were done to demonstrate the efficacy of the product. This is particularly important for commercial products because those products are not used by so many people, and so we really need to see against what types of organisms and what organisms they've been tested against, and that should be documented, and we should have access to those information. Very quickly, just to point out that there are two different systems in the kind of certificates to and names of disinfectants. In the US and in Europe, we work differently, and in Pakistan, you might have the two products. In the US, the products are classified according to their efficacy, and so the most efficacious are sterilants. There are very strong disinfectants, and then you have different lower categories. In Europe, it's mostly based on the type of agent, and so a disinfectant can be bactericide, for instance, another can be virucide, and some product might be bactericide, mycobactericide, virucide, and so on. So we kind of add the names in the definition of the disinfectant. So if we choose a product based on efficacy, we need to check the product, its performance, and also the spectrum of efficacy. I want to point out the risk of linked to the claims from the suppliers. They might easily claim activity, efficacy against some agents and so on, but we need to go a little bit further. First, some claims could be just marketing, and when now we see many products with a new label saying it's active against coronavirus. This is very easy to say because coronavirus is a very sensitive virus, and so even soap is effective against SARS coronavirus. So it doesn't really say much about the real activity of the product. Then also some suppliers claim that their product is efficacious, for instance, against such and such virus. But if you look at the detailed information, technical information, you will realize that for that product, for instance, you need a 10 times higher concentration than with another product. Of course, this is not so interesting. Even worse, if you look at the contact time, sometimes to be able to get the certificate from the test, instead of exposing the agent for 1 minute or 15 minutes, sometimes it takes a few hours to get rid of the virus or the bacterium. So you need to look at those information. It's not interesting for you to have a product where you have to wait for hours before it's inactivated. Then also be aware that suppliers may use different testing protocols and conditions of use. So there is testing on suspension, on surfaces, and so on. And those, of course, can lead to different results. Anyway, for any critical use of a disinfectant, so in this case, coronavirus, even if it's not highly resistant, but also for very resistant or very hazardous virus, you need always to ask for additional technical information to be sure that you have the right product. Tests were conducted, and so you should ask about those tests, about the standards that were used, about the certificates that they have, and if possible, against the test reports. In this table, I put the different categories of disinfectants versus the different possible use. I didn't put there hand washing, hand decontamination, but all the materials are there. Also, I won't go into detail to that, but you can see that H2O2 and hypochlorite, for instance, they can be used for many different purposes, and H2O2 for all purposes. So those products are clearly a potential for a wide application. You can use them for so many things that normally with those products you should have a very good solution for most situations. Actually, based on that, in most laboratory or hospital settings, a combination of 2 disinfectants is sufficient. And when I say 2 disinfectants, we generally try to have a very fast-acting disinfectant for frequent routine use, and something with a wider spectrum for kind of a more in-depth decontamination. And so the combination that we have in most labs is 70% ethanol together with sodium hypochlorite bleach. So if you have those 2 in a lab, you can cover most situations. Same thing if you have 70% ethanol and H2O2. For a very specific case, you might need another disinfectant. It could be the case for the inside decontamination of some sensitive equipment. And sometimes the supplier of the equipment will recommend a specific disinfectant, with a guarantee that in that case there will be no corrosion and the equipment will still keep working. So you need to be careful about that and possibly have an additional disinfectant. Also, if you want to conduct gaseous decontamination, airborne decontamination of the room, in that case you might need another product, which could be formaldehyde or H2O2. Normally this is only done in BSL-3 labs, but sometimes in hospitals for some isolation rooms and so on, you also proceed to that. And then you might also want a more stable concentrated disinfectant if you want to have it in the spill kit, because it's they are more stable and they have a longer shelf life and they are easy to use in such a kit. Anyways, as a general idea there, you should remember that you should avoid using too many disinfectants in the same organization. If you have too many, there will be mistakes. People will use one instead of the other. They might misuse them, and it should also make logistics much more complicated. Other aspects that you need to take into consideration when choosing a disinfectant are its availability on the local market. You should look what is available in Pakistan, not just look on the internet and try to get access to other products. The costs, the stability, ease of use, and so on, and also the safety and environmental profile. And from that point of view, there is one document that is extremely useful, and that exists for each single disinfectant, is the safety data sheet. In that document, you will see all the information on the hazard, on the risk, and on the measure to avoid exposing people or to avoid any problems actually. So you should ask for them. It's in our countries, it's a legal obligation to have them. And you should also keep them available because there are also instructions in case of an incident, for instance, to avoid that it gets too bad. So now it's time for the summary in Urdu, and perhaps after that, a few questions that could be related to this specific part. So Dr. Samra, if you could present the summary, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Philippe. Vishal, can you see the slides?
Not yet. So while Samra is just setting up her slides, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. Yes, we can see them. Oh, and then they disappeared again.
Now?
I can see your screen, but slides have not appeared yet. Okay, we can. Thank you. And we lost you again.
Okay.
So Samra, what I will do is I will share my screen and you can give the summary because I think there's some technical issue on your part. So if you can see my screen, why don't I just move the slides for you?
COVID-19 की डिकॉन्टेमिनेशन के लिए इस्तेमाल होने वाले डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स और उनकी कीमत। नेक्स्ट, आज की प्रेजेंटेशन में आप देखेंगे कि सबसे बेहतरीन डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स कौन से हैं, पाकिस्तान में मौजूद डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स में क्या-क्या खूबियां हैं और कोविड-19 के लिए आप कौन सा डिसइंफेक्टेंट इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं। डिसइंफेक्टेंट एक ऐसा मुरक्कब है जिससे जरासीम को गैर फाल बनाया जा सकता है। बैक्टीरियासाइड्स बैक्टीरिया, वायरस और फंगस को गैर फाल बनाते हैं। सैनिटाइजर्स वेजिटेटिव बैक्टीरिया की तादाद को कम कर देते हैं, जबकि एंटीसेप्टिक्स जरासीम के असर से बचाते हैं और उनकी पैदावार को रोकते हैं। नेक्स्ट, बहुत सारी तरह के डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स अवेलेबल हैं, जैसे एथेनॉल, हाइड्रोजन पेरोक्साइड एंड ब्लीच। नेक्स्ट, लेकिन इनमें से कोई भी 100% मिसाली नहीं है, क्योंकि हर किसी में कोई ना कोई नुक्स होता है। एक डिसइंफेक्टेंट की सबसे अहम खूबियां ये हैं कि इसे कम से कम वक्त में ज्यादा असरअंदाज होना चाहिए, इसे ज्यादा से ज्यादा जरासीम के खिलाफ पुरअसर होना चाहिए और ज्यादा से ज्यादा जरासीम के खिलाफ इसको इस्तेमाल किया जा सकता चाहिए और मुख्तलिफ हालात में, जैसे आपके आलात की, कमरे की, माया अशिया की सफाई में इस्तेमाल के काबिल होना चाहिए। डिसइंफेक्टेंट किस तरह से जरासीम पर असरअंदाज हो सकता है? वो जरासीम के खुलिये की दीवार, झिल्ली, प्रोटीन, जीनियाती मादे यानी डीएनए, आरएनए के खिलाफ पुरअसर होना चाहिए और ब्लीच में ये सारी खूबियां पाई जाती हैं। ज्यादातर डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स कई तरीकों से जरासीम को खत्म करने में मदद करते हैं। इस चार्ट से पता चलता है कि कौन से डिसइंफेक्टेंट किस किस जरासीम के खिलाफ पुरअसर हैं। कोविड-19 एक लिपिड एनवेलप वायरस है जिस पर चिकनाई का खोल होता है और हर तरह के डिसइंफेक्टेंट इसके खिलाफ पुरअसर हैं। इन डिसइंफेक्टेंट में सबसे ज्यादा ब्लीच, हाइड्रोजन पेरोक्साइड और फॉर्मेलिन सबसे ज्यादा अकसाम के जरासीम के खिलाफ पुरअसर हैं। जो भी डिसइंफेक्टेंट बाजार में दस्तयाब हैं, उनके इस्तेमाल से पहले ये तज्जिया करना बहुत जरूरी है कि वो कौन से जरासीम के खिलाफ कितने पुरअसर हैं। ये चार्ट आपको यूएस में इस्तेमाल होने वाले डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स के बारे में मालूमात मुहैया करता है। यूरोप का सिस्टम यूएस से डिफरेंट है और वहाँ पे जो डिसइंफेक्टेंट इस्तेमाल हो रहे हैं वो वहाँ के तज्जिए की बुनियाद पर मालूमात फराहम करते हैं। हर जगह के तज्जिए की बुनियाद पर डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स मुख्तलिफ मयार के तौर पर मुकर्रर किए गए हैं और वो उन्हीं जगहों पे कि वहाँ के हालात को देखते हुए उनको तौर टेस्ट किया जाए उनके ऊपर। बेचने वाला आपको असल से ज्यादा खूबियां ना बता, इसलिए बहुत मोहतात होकर इसका तज्जिया करें कि ये कितनी देर में किन जरासीम के खिलाफ असर करता है और उनसे इसकी तकनीकी मालूमात। ये आपको बारे में बता रहे हैं, इनमें मौके पर इस्तेमाल किए जाते हैं, जैसे ब्लीच, बहुत महदूद इस्तेमाल किए जा सकते हैं। लेकिन जरूरत से ज्यादा का मुरक्कब बनाने से इसका इस्तेमाल नुकसानदेह हो सकता है। हर डिसइंफेक्टेंट के कोई ना कोई नुकसानात होते हैं, लेकिन इंतखाब करते वक्त
Thank you, Samra, for this section. I think थोड़ी सी disturbance थी due to connectivity issue. We will try कि हम आप लोगों को summary दोबारा ठीक करके भेज दें in Urdu. So I'm sorry about that. Philippe, do you have any questions you would like to answer at this point?
Actually, there was only one technical question, I would say, and it's about the health effect of H2O2. Since I don't cover that product in the following part, I will just say a word about that. Actually, H2O2 is a very interesting product because it's a wide spectrum disinfectant which can be used for many things, including room decontamination, airborne decontamination. It's very interesting because when using it, it degrades into water and oxygen. So you don't have any negative aspects, contamination of the environment. So from the environmental point of view, it's a very good product. But for that, we use strong concentration at the start. And those strong concentration of the product can be dangerous for health. The main health problems are it's toxic by inhalation. So if we breathe it, it's toxic in case we would ingest it. That is less likely. But it's also it also causes severe eye and skin damage when exposed to high concentration. So we need to be careful. And if, for instance, we proceed to a room decontamination, be sure that the room is airtight enough so that we don't spread the product in other rooms, because we could have an impact on the people. And also we need to ventilate the room before we enter inside of the room after that, because there could still be some products which is not degraded, and that can be dangerous. Okay. So I give that explanation because it's not planned in the rest of the presentation. But now we'll look at a few common disinfectants that are available in Pakistan. But I didn't present this one. So the first one is ethanol. A recommended concentration of ethanol is 70%, and you will see different sources saying between 60 and 75, but traditionally we use 70%, which is considered most efficient. It's efficacious against bacteria, against envelope virus, including SARS coronavirus 2, but it has a limited efficacy for a number of other organisms, like some mycobacteria, like Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and also non-enveloped viruses. Recommended use is only for surfaces, benchtops, safety cabinet, also the external surface of lab equipment, instruments, and so on. The main characteristic of ethanol, it evaporates very quickly, and so it needs to act very quickly. And so it's a product that acts with a very short contact time. And also it leaves no residue, so it's easy to use it frequently in a routine because it just disappears. Also, it's a non-proprietary product, so that means that there are numerous suppliers, and it's highly available and not too expensive, I would say. Just this slide, I won't go through it in detail, but it's to show that as any disinfecting product, ethanol also some drawbacks and some effect on health, and that you need to really look at STS to find that type of information and to take appropriate precautions. The second product I developed is Bleach, and Bleach is a very interesting product from many points of view, mainly because of its efficacy. It's efficacious against practically all biological agents, bacteria, including mycobacteria, virus, including non-enveloped virus, yeast, fungi, but also bacterial and fungal spores. So it can really be used in all those disinfectants. So really large spectrum. Also, concentration and contact time needs to be adapted to first the desired level of decontamination. If you use a higher concentration, you will decontamination. The types of material to decontaminate, corrosive, you might in some case do some coercion if you use high concentration on some type of equipment. The agents that need to be inactivated, the most resistant, might need a higher concentration, and also the type and conditions of use. For instance, if you have a high organic load, a lot of organic matter, nutrients, and so on, in that case, you also need to work at a higher concentration. So recommended use, you can see it can be used for many different, practically all the purpose, for surfaces, including floors, for liquids, for treatment by immersion, for instance, glassware or some tools. Some porous materials like fabrics, lab coats, for instance, or bedding sheets at a very low concentration, but it can be used to decontaminate that. And also for spill situation at high concentration, because if we want to have just one procedure that covers all situations, including in case of high organic load. Just one thing about spills, you can either use the bleach that you have in your lab, which is already in some way diluted to some point, or concentrated bleach. But if you want to have the disinfectant inside your spill kit, in that case, you might want to have a solid form, like NaDCC, which is presented in form of powder and tablets. It's much more stable, so it has a longer shelf life, and also particularly the powder can be used directly on the spill, and it will kind of absorb the spill. So that can be interesting. And many other properties are very close to bleach. So characteristics of bleach: it's a cheap, non-proprietary product, so there are numerous suppliers. It's widely distributed, you can find it quite easily. A point that I already evoked is that the activity is lower, and thus the efficacy is lower in presence of organic matter. So if you have rich media with a lot of nutrients and so on, in that case, you need to increase the concentration and or contact time. So that's something we need to take into consideration when we use bleach. Also, it's not so stable. It progressively loses part of its activity over time, especially in warm temperature, like in Pakistan. So that means that when we have stocks of bleach, for instance, we need to manage the storage time, but also the condition of storage, if possible, in a cooler and ventilated place. We also possibly need to work at higher concentration. For instance, if we prepare the bleach for the whole week on the Monday, for instance, in that case, you might make it stronger so that it's still efficacious at the end of the week. However, for any kind of critical use, we should use freshly prepared diluted bleach. In that case, we get exactly the concentration that we need. The last important characteristic is that it's available at different initial concentration. I mean that the bleach that are sold, they have different concentration in chlorine, and chlorine is what really will inactivate the biological agent. So most commercial household bleaches have a concentration of 5% of available chlorine, while sodium hypochlorite for laboratory purpose can have a concentration between 9 or 10 up to 15%. So when you do the dilution, of course, you should know the concentration at the start. So the generally recommended concentration for an exposure time, contact time of 15 minutes for most laboratory application is 0.1% of available chlorine, meaning 1 gram per liter of available chlorine. In presence of high organic load, you need to work at a higher concentration, and then we use 0.5%. Also for spill cleanup, because we want to always to be on the safe side, we don't know exactly what is spilled and so on, we work at the highest concentration, that means 0.5%. Again, I stress on that point of attention. You need to always consider the initial concentration before you do the diluting. If you have a laboratory bleach at a high concentration, you need to dilute it more to get the right concentration. Again, some information from the SDS. Bleach is not such a user-friendly product, especially at high concentration. We need to take some precautions, especially when you use those concentrated solutions. But I won't go through this, just to invite you to look at that kind of information also. So if we conclude about bleach, it's a very effective, wide-spectrum, multi-purpose, and cheap disinfectant. So that's why it is so much recommended, and so that's why it is so much used in many labs. Still, it has some significant drawbacks. First, stability is limited. It's not as stable as some other products. Also, it reacts against some quite reactive chemicals, but that means that in a chemical lab where you would have some low-level biological activity, for instance, it's probably better not to use bleach because of the risk of reactivity with some of the chemicals. It's corrosive to some metals, but also to skin and eyes. There is that variability of the activity linked to the contents of organic matter, but we can compensate for that in using a higher concentration, longer contact time. And in general, the health and safety profile is quite poor. And for the environment, for instance, it's not the best product. Still, I would kind of moderate that for a country like Pakistan, because if you have effluents that contain bleach, they will go into the water courses, which already have some high concentration of organic content, low content, yeah. Also some bacteria, viruses, and so on. And so the bleach there will not do a lot of damage. It could even in some way be a little bit beneficial. So I don't think it's a real issue in the current situation in Pakistan. Then I added a few slides because during the first session, there were a number of questions on some disinfectants and some commercial disinfectants. So, and I want to say a word about that. First thing to know about commercial disinfectants is that most, if not all of them, are proprietary mixes of various products. So those companies, they put a number of different products together to make their own disinfectants. So they use active ingredients. So those are really the ones who kill the biological agent, like alcohol, oxidizer, aldehyde, cracks, and so on. And they also use non-active ingredients, which can, in some way, sometimes improve the efficacy, like surfactant, detergent, and also some which are not so essential, even if, for instance, oils. And that's mainly for aspects like the smells, the smell of the product, and so on. But so there are mixes of different products. The rationale for doing that is that in combining different ingredients, especially different active ingredients, they might have a more efficacy in some cases, but they can also reduce the costs of manufacturing the product. For instance, in combining two active ingredients, they might lower the concentration of the most expensive ingredients. So it's quite interesting for them. Also, since they have their own formula, so they are proprietary rights. So they protect themselves from being copied by the competition and so on with patents and so on. So their products are more or less unique, even if some copy them. Also, the fact that they have their own formula and their own product, they can use it in marketing as a marketing argument. They can claim a higher efficacy, ease of use. They can claim that it doesn't have any odor, and so on and so on. Also, one thing about pricing: the pricing of commercial disinfectants is generally higher for the same level of efficacy. Anyways, you might still be tempted by some commercial products because they might have some advantages. Some are efficacious and some are very easy to use. They are stable, you don't have to dilute them and so on. So it can be very easy. But in that case, you should always require the product's technical information, including the SDS, so that you know exactly what product you get. So there were a number of questions about Dettol, and I'm not surprised because if you look on forums on the internet, you will also see that there are always many questions about Dettol. Actually, a first thing to know is that Dettol is not a disinfectant. Dettol is not the name of a product. It's a whole product line. Just to illustrate this, I took the first 4 SDS that I found on the internet, and I put the name of the product there on the left column, and then you see that the 3 first, for instance, they seem to be more or less the same product, and most people won't pay attention in the different name of the product. But if you look at the composition is totally different. The contents are not the same, the ingredients are not the same. And if you look at the concentrations, there is also a huge difference. There are even things that are a bit strange, like the one which is called disinfectant, which should be more efficacious than an antiseptic. If you look at the concentration of alcohol and isopropanol, for instance, is lower than for the antiseptic. So many questions when you see that. But anyways, it's not just one product, it's a bunch of different products. If we look at the Dettol product line as a whole, we see that there are two main active ingredients, alcohol and isopropanol, and chlorhexidine. What we see also is that there is always less than 60% of alcohol, and 60% is the lower limit of efficacy. And in most products, there is less than 10 or 5% of isopropanol, or sometimes no alcohol at all. There is a low concentration of active ingredients, but also which can partly compensate by the use of some other active ingredients, like chlorhexidine or quacks, for instance. There are claims of efficacy, but efficacy data are not easily available. If you go on the website of for instance, we'll see that there you will see that there is a lot of commercial information but very few data. And even if you ask the suppliers to provide with the technical data, most of the time they won't be able to give you any. So I would conclude about Dettol that most Dettol products are rather weak disinfectants. They are more bactericidal, sanitizing products, bacteriostatic or antiseptic product than real disinfectant. And that even if some of the Dettol products will probably be useful against SARS coronavirus 2, because it's a very sensitive virus, to me, they are not to be used in a healthcare or laboratory setting. There are much better products where you can have a much better efficacy. The second product, which is often a component of a commercial product and for which there were questions, was chlorhexidine. It's a biguanide with an intermediate spectrum of activity, so not a complete spectrum of activity. It's mainly bactericidal and bacteriostatic, depending on its concentration. It's also active against some viruses, but mainly the lipidic virus, not the others. Also, depending on the concentration, it can be considered either a disinfectant or an antiseptic. Most generally, in commercial products, it's not just chlorhexidine, but it's mixed with other active ingredients such as alcohol and quacks. And so it's a kind of mixture of different modes of action due to the different products. So the main applications of chlorhexidine is as an antiseptic, just at low concentration. For instance, to prepare the skin before surgery, to avoid any contamination when starting the surgery, to treat wounds, for instance, and also in oral hygiene. Other disinfectant, so a higher concentration. In that case, it can be used for hand disinfection, but also for to treat, to decontaminate, to dentistry tools. So again, since SARS coronavirus 2 is sensitive, chlorhexidine will also certainly be useful, but for more specific application, I would say. So now, as conclusions, some important features about disinfectant versus SARS coronavirus 2. First, even if many disinfectants are likely to act against SARS coronavirus 2, some will offer better guarantee. And so, for instance, the WHO recommends 3 disinfectants against SARS coronavirus 2. And this is true for hospital settings and laboratories, but also in general use. Those 3 products are bleach at the concentration that I mentioned before, or in some recommendation you see sometimes a higher concentration. Ethanol at 70% and hydrogen peroxide at 5.5%. So these are really the ones which are specifically recommended by WHO for in case of risk of coronavirus infection, so to decontaminate that, but also in general. So using disinfecting products against COVID-19, I would say that in healthcare and laboratory settings, the disinfectants that are normally already in use in those settings, if they are efficacious with the broad spectrum, they are okay. You should not change anything. You could keep using them. If not, if you need to add some products, in that case, I would give the priority to the WHO recommended disinfectant, so mainly ethanol and bleach. In other settings, those non-healthcare and non-laboratory, for instance, at home, in public areas and so on, you can still use bleach at low concentration, but in that case, you may also use other products, including many lower level commercial products. And actually, there are also detailed recommendations of WHO for the use of different products in those non-hospital and non-laboratory settings. Anyways, these are two general remarks. First, the products that you will use in your labs always need to be used according to the WHO recommendation, or if there are commercial products, according to the supplier's recommendation. So you need to be very careful about that. And that's true for the applications, it's true for the concentration, and it's true for the time of contact. And then you should always check the efficacy, recommended use, and other features when you look for a new disinfectant. And that would also include the EHS profile, because there are always some possible issues with respect to health effects, for instance. So that's the end of this. I will just present, shortly invite you to the next session, which will be session 3 on August 20. And that will be mostly on autoclaving. For those who attended the 3-day workshops on waste management at the end of last year, this will be a summary of the part on autoclave. So it will be a reminder for them. And then the last session will be questions and answers on actually, we will try to answer all the questions asked during the 3 sessions before. So now, Dr. Samra, if you could present the summary in Urdu, please.
Thank you, Philip. Mashal, can you see the slides?
We can see your screen, but not the slides.
Hello.
Samra, we can see your screen, but not the slide. Samra, I'm going to share my screen, and
Okay,
maybe
Mashal,
that will make things.
can you please help me? Okay. Okay.
Samra, I think we're having a little technical difficulty and we can't hear you. So I will start the summary of this section now. So in this section, Philippe ने आपसे बात की थी chemical decontamination की, and हमने थोड़े से common थोड़े से common disinfectants जो पाकिस्तान में available हैं वो discuss किया था. सबसे पहले हम आते हैं ethanol पे. Ethanol की जो recommended concentration है यानी ताकत जो है वो 70% पे है। ये बैक्टीरिया वायरसेस के अगेंस्ट है, कुछ चीजों के अगेंस्ट उसकी इतनी एफिकेसी नहीं है, वो है माइक्रोबैक्टीरिया एंड नॉन एनवेलोप वायरसेस। इसका कॉमन यूज है कि आप इससे सर्फेसेस साफ कर सकें। इसका फायदा एक ये कि इसका कॉन्टैक्ट टाइम शॉर्ट है एंड काफी सप्लायर्स हैं, उसकी अवेलेबिलिटी इजीली अवेलेबल होती है। इसको इस्तेमाल करते हुए इसके थोड़े से हैजर्ड्स भी हमें पता होने चाहिए। एथेनॉल हाईली फ्लेमेबल हो सकता है, एज इन इससे आग बहुत जल्दी लग सकती है। ये आपके स्किन को इरिटेशन भी कॉज कर सकता है, कुछ लोगों को इससे एलर्जीज होंगी एंड इन एक्सट्रीम केसेस ये आपके ऑर्गन्स को भी डैमेज कर सकता है। सेकंड जो कॉमन डिसइंफेक्टेंट अवेलेबल है दैट इज ब्लीच। ब्लीच की एफिकेसी भी अगेंस्ट बैक्टीरिया इंक्लूडिंग माइक्रोबैक्टीरिया के अगेंस्ट है, जो एथेनॉल की नहीं थी। इसके अंदर वायरसेस भी होते हैं इंक्लूडिंग नॉन एनवेलप। अनदर एडिशनल पॉइंट फॉर ब्लीच इज की यीस्ट एंड फंगाई को भी आप उसके लिए अगेंस्ट भी यूज कर सकते हैं एंड अदर बैक्टीरियल एंड फंगस स्पोर्स के भी। इसका जो कॉन्सेंट्रेशन एंड कॉन्टैक्ट टाइम होता है वो आपने अडेप्ट करना होता है डिपेंडिंग ऑन किस लेवल की आप डिकंटामिनेशन चाह रही हैं, किस मटेरियल को आप डिकंटामिनेट करना चाह रहे हैं, एजेंट्स क्या हैं जिनको आप इनएक्टिवेट करना चाह रहे हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल ऊपर जो लिखे हुए हैं कि बैक्टीरिया वायरसेस है, कौन सा इनमें से एजेंट है एंड द टाइप एंड किस किस्म का आप इसको यूज करना चाह रहे हैं। तो यूजेस में जो ब्लीच के कॉमन आते हैं वो हैं सर्फेसेस। फॉर एग्जांपल आपके लैब्स में अगर आप उसके इक्विपमेंट को, इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स को, उन सबको ग्लास पर जिन चीजों से आप काम करें उनको आप डिसइंफेक्ट करना चाह रहे हैं, अगर आप जमीन को डिसइंफेक्ट करना चाह रहे हैं, अगर बाकी लिक्विड्स को आप डिसइंफेक्ट करना चाह रहे हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल ब्लड प्रोडक्ट्स, बैक्टीरिया, वायरल कच्चेस अगर कहीं गिरे हुए हैं, ट्रीटमेंट अगर आप करना चाह रहे हैं ग्लासवेयर की फॉर एग्जांपल जिसके अंदर आपने यूज किया होगा अपने कल्चर्स वगैरह को, अदर पोरस मटेरियल्स फॉर एग्जांपल फैब्रिक्स एट लो कॉन्सेंट्रेशन को भी आप डिसइंफेक्ट कर सकते हैं। हाई कॉन्सेंट्रेशन में इसको करते हुए थोड़ा सा ख्याल रखें, वो फैब्रिक को खराब कर सकता है। एंड स्पिल अगर हो चुका है लैब में, आप किसी कोई चीज गिर गई है तो उसको भी लो कॉन्सेंट्रेशन, हाई कॉन्सेंट्रेशन में आप उसको यूज कर सकते हैं। ब्लीच की कुछ कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स जो इसको एक यूजफुल डिसइंफेक्टेंट बनाता है वो तो एक ये है कि इनएक्सपेंसिव है, इजीली अवेलेबल है, इसकी वो कंसंट्रेशन एंड कांटेक्ट टाइम अडेप्टेबल है, आप उसको डिफरेंट चीजों से डिफरेंट उस पर यूज कर सकते हैं। जो कमर्शियली वैसे अवेलेबल हैं डिफरेंट कॉन्सेंट्रेशन, फॉर एग्जांपल अगर आप घर के अंदर डिकंटामिनेशन या कुछ डिसइंफेक्ट करना चाह रहे हैं तो 5% ब्लीच इज अ गुड कॉन्सेंट्रेशन जिससे ये चीज हो सकती है। एंड फॉर लैबोरेटरी पर्पस में आप इसकी कॉन्सेंट्रेशन 10 to 15% रखें। जनरली हमें जो रिकमेंडेशन कॉन्सेंट्रेशन है लैबोरेटरी के लिए 0.01% ऑफ अवेलेबल क्लोरीन, ऑर्गेनिक लोड अगर प्रेजेंट हो तो 0.5% एंड अगर स्पिल क्लीनअप है तो उसमें भी 0.5% जो हाई कॉन्सेंट्रेशन कंसिडर किया जाता है। एंड प्लीज एक बात बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है ताकि आप किसी चीज को डैमेज ना करें एंड खुद भी आप इसके जो नेगेटिव इफेक्ट्स हैं उससे बच के रहें कि कंसंट्रेशन को हमेशा कंसिडर करें डाइल्यूट करने से पहले। यूजुअली जो मोस्टली जो कांटेक्ट टाइम इन मोस्ट केसेस होगा वो होगा 15 मिनट्स फॉर ब्लीच। ब्लीच लाइक वी सेड कि इसकी वो सेफ्टी प्रोफाइल को भी नजर में रखना जरूरी होता है क्योंकि ये इसके हेल्थ इफेक्ट्स डायरेक्ट हो सकते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल ये सीवियर स्किन बर्न्स एंड आई डैमेज कॉज कर सकता है, गैसेस फॉर्म में ये आपको फ्लेमेबल होता है, ये आग लगा सकता है, आई इरिटेशन कॉज कर सकता है और अगर आप बहुत ज्यादा इनहेल करें तो ये जानलेवा भी हो सकता है। तो इन कंक्लूजन ब्लीच काफी इफेक्टिव डिसइंफेक्टेंट है, इसका स्पेक्ट्रम बहुत वाइड है, ये काफी चीजों के अगेंस्ट एक्ट करता है, मल्टीपर्पस है एंड इजीली अवेलेबल है एंड सस्ता भी है। तो डेटॉल पे हम आते हैं। डेटॉल हम पाकिस्तान में बहुत ज्यादा यूज होता है। सबसे जो मेन पॉइंट डेटॉल के बारे में याद रखना जरूरी है कि डेटॉल एक ब्रांड का नाम है, एक प्रोडक्ट का नाम नहीं है। वो डेटॉल जो ब्रांड है उसके अंदर और बहुत सी चीजें आती हैं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर सेप्टिक डिसइंफेक्टेंट जिसके अंदर आइसोप्रोपेनॉल होगा, लिक्विड डिसइंफेक्टेंट जिसके अंदर पाइन ऑयल, आइसोप्रोपेनॉल, क्लोरोजाइनॉल कुछ भी लाइक उनमें से कुछ भी चीज प्रेजेंट हो सकती है। लिक्विड डिसइंफेक्टेंट के अंदर अगेन आइसोप्रोपेनॉल जो एक अल्कोहल है वो है। हैंड वॉश के अंदर हमारे पास भी डिफरेंट मटेरियल्स होते हैं एंड इनकी कॉन्सेंट्रेशन डिपेंडिंग ऑन जिस लेवल ऑफ डिसइंफेक्टेंट है वो भी वेरी करती रहती है। मोस्टली इनके जो एक्टिव इंग्रेडिएंट्स हैं वो अल्कोहल के फॉर्म्स हैं, बट इट्स ऑलवेज लेस देन 60% अल्कोहल इन मोस्ट ऑफ द केसेस जिसके अंदर डेटॉल यूज हो रहा होता है, तो उसकी कॉन्सेंट्रेशन काफी लो है। एंड इसलिए क्योंकि वो जो उसकी एफिकेसी और जो एफिकेसी इसके क्लेम्स होते हैं, बॉटल में अक्सर लिखा होता है कि किल्स 99% ऑफ जर्म्स, ये सब कुछ साइंस, बिकॉज ये प्रोडक्ट लाइन है एंड कमर्शियली अवेलेबल है, ये सब कुछ डाटा इसके पीछे बहुत कम है। तो उसको यूज करते हुए आप ज्यादातर बस ये ध्यान में रखें और ये रखें कि एक वीक डिसइंफेक्टेंट है और उसको उस तरह से यूज करें। कुछ डेटॉल के जो प्रोडक्ट्स हैं वो हैं कोविड-19 सार्स कोरोना वायरस 2 के अगेंस्ट या कोरोना वायरस के अगेंस्ट यूजफुल, लेकिन इनको हेल्थ केयर एंड लैबोरेटरी सेटिंग्स में मत रखें क्योंकि इसके अंदर कॉन्सेंट्रेशन बहुत कम होती है, तो आपका वो लेवल ऑफ एफिकेसी नहीं होगा। फिर हमने एक और डिस्कस किया क्लोरोहेक्सिडाइन, ये भी एक एंटीसेप्टिक कंसिडर किया जाता है डिपेंडिंग या डिसइंफेक्टेंट डिपेंडिंग ऑन आप इस कॉन्सेंट्रेशन में इसको इस्तेमाल करें। इसके जो मेन यूज हैं वो हैं स्किन पे, अगर आप सर्जरी या फिर सर्जरी से पहले आप अपने जख्म वगैरह के लिए, ओरल हाइजीन के लिए, और एज अ डिसइंफेक्टेंट ये यूज हो सकता है, थोड़ा सा हायर कॉन्सेंट्रेशन देन एंटीसेप्टिक फॉर हाथ धोने के लिए या डेंटिस्ट्री टूल्स साफ करने के लिए। तो इन कंक्लूजन हम ये कह सकते हैं कि जो वी आर लकी कि जो सार्स कोरोना वायरस है ये एक पोल्डी रेजिस्टेंट वायरस है, जिसका मतलब ये है कि वो ज्यादातर डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स जो हमारे पास अवेलेबल है उससे खत्म किया जा सकता है। WHO के जो डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स रेकमेंडेड हैं अगेंस्ट कोरोना सार्स कोरोना वायरस वो है सोडियम हाइपोक्लोराइड, जिसको हम आमतौर पे ब्लीच कहते हैं, एथेनॉल एटलीस्ट 70% की कॉन्सेंट्रेशन में, एंड हाइड्रोजन पेरोक्साइड 5% की कॉन्सेंट्रेशन में। अदर डिसइंफेक्टेंट्स जो हमारे पास अवेलेबल हैं, जो आपके पास अवेलेबल हैं, वो मोस्ट लाइकली वो सार्स कोरोना वायरस के अगेंस्ट भी इफेक्टिव होंगे, बिकॉज ये एक सेंसिटिव वायरस है। लेकिन बहुत जरूरी है कि हम जब ये चीजें इस्तेमाल करें हम WHO की रिकमेंडेशंस को प्रायोरिटी दें, जिसके अंदर एथेनॉल एंड ब्लीच आता है, स्पेशली अगर आप एक हेल्थ केयर सेटिंग या लैबोरेटरी सेटिंग में काम करें। बाकी सेटिंग्स में फॉर एग्जांपल अगर आप घर पे, रेस्टोरेंट पे, तो इसमें आप ब्लीच को लो कॉन्सेंट्रेशन में भी यूज कर सकते हैं एंड अदर कमर्शियल प्रोडक्ट्स भी आप यूज कर सकते हैं। बट इट्स ऑलवेज इंपॉर्टेंट कि आप जो भी प्रोडक्ट यूज करें वो WHO या जिस सप्लायर से आप ले रहे हैं उसकी रिकमेंडेशन पे यूज करें एंड उसकी एफिकेसी हमेशा चेक करें, ताकि आपको पता हो कि वो कितना स्टेबल है, उसकी कितना यूज है, नहीं सब क्या यूज है और अवेलेबिलिटी कितनी है, ये सब चीजें आप नजर में रखते हुए वो करें। हमारा नेक्स्ट सेशन 20 अगस्त को होगा, वो ऑटोक्लेविंग पे होगा। उसके बाद अगला सेशन आपके क्वेश्चन एंड आंसर्स होंगे जो आपने जितने भी पूछे हैं इन ऑल द सेशंस। Philippe, is there any question that you would like to address right now?
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, there are a few questions actually, but we are the time is almost gone. Perhaps just two things. Why 70% alcohol is more effective than, for instance, 100%? Is that 100% evaporates too quickly, and actually there is not enough water content so that it doesn't penetrate the cells so easily. So it's mainly a physical aspect. So, but anyways, this is really something which has really been demonstrated. Another question was again about H2O2. Why should we use it because it accelerates cellular degenerescence? Actually, just one thing about that is that all those disinfectants are always nasty products. They are made to kill microorganisms, so they can also damage cells, including our cells. And so it's a matter of concentration. If you look at the recommendation for H2O2, it's 0.5%, so it's highly diluted. But of course, otherwise we could not use it. But also we don't drink it. We are not really directly exposed to it. So don't expect those products to be harmless. They are not. Their purpose is to kill microorganisms, so they will affect our cells. This is also a reason why we should not do useless overkill with disinfectants. We need to have a product which is efficacious, but we don't need to always work at higher concentrations, because in that case we are also in some way we might also damage ourselves and so on. So there are drawbacks. We always need to keep that in mind. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you also for the few new questions, and I also see that, for instance, Dr. Fazal Hanif answers some questions. Thank you very much. So I would be pleased to see you in a few days for session 3 on autoclaving, especially if you've not followed the seminar on biowaste management. So goodbye, everybody, and thank you again.
Hi, Michelle. Do you want to have a
Thank
quick
you,
meeting
Philippe.